Welcome to the Policy Committee, June 12th, and we're going to have introductions around the table, and we'll start with Ms. O'Neill.
Pat O'Neill, committee member.
Ananda Tadakonda, student member of the board.
Lori Christina Webb, Chief of Staff for the board.
Victoria Van Dyke, board staff.
Maureen McNamara, Office of the General Counsel.
Stephanie Williams, Associate General Counsel.
Josh Sivan, General Counsel.
Essie McGuire, Operations.
Tracy Foster, Executive Director, Chief Academic Officer.
Aranza Labad, Executive Director, Office of School Support and Improvement.
And I'm Rebecca Spondrowski, Board of Education.
And I'm Judy Daka, and we can begin by looking at the minutes. Are there any questions about the minutes from last meeting? Nope, hearing none. Okay, we'll accept the minutes as they are. And we'll start with Policy IDA, school year calendar, and that will go to Essie. Ms. McGuire.
Thank you. So this is the first Policy Committee meeting discussion of the 2020 and 2021 school year calendar. The kickoff for these processes does start early so that we have time to do the planning that we need to do in order to get the calendar approved in advance, well in advance of the next school year. So again, the Board of Education Policy IDA, which is for the school year calendar, does call for that conversation to start with the Policy Management Committee. And so what we'll do today is really just walk through a brief overview of the parameters of the calendar that we'll be working with, and then outline the next steps that we'll be taking in order to start to put the calendar together to bring back for your review. One thing that is different this year in our 2020-2021 calendar development than has been is that the legislature did adopt legislation in the General Assembly to lift the restrictions that have been in place for the last 3 years regarding the start and end date for the instructional year. And so, of course, for the last 3 years, we've been working with parameters set by executive order to begin after Labor Day and to end by June 15th. And again, the legislature has passed legislation that lifts those restrictions. Also, however, that legislation does anticipate the likelihood, or at least the very strong possibility, that there might be further legislative action or a ballot referendum and some possibility of putting this legislation before the voters. And so it's possible that there would be a recurrence of constraints and restrictions on the school year going forward. So again, that's just a backdrop that we'll want to be mindful of as we do put together scenarios for the calendars as we go forward. With that in mind, your memo on page 2 does outline certainly there are still various aspects and requirements in state law that we're still required to follow. State law does require a minimum of 180 instructional days and also has a minimum number of hours that MCPS typically schedules well above the minimum number of hours, and we do schedule a couple of days above the minimum required number of days as well. And then there are a number of dates rather, that the state law does require schools to be closed. And so those dates are identified for you, again, on page 2 of your memo. Next year, for the 2021 school year, Labor Day actually falls quite late. It's on September 7th, which again just puts us sort of in that place in the calendar in terms of thinking about Labor Day and the relative possibilities of our start time. Another element that will affect this calendar is that Board Policy IDA does state that when the date of a presidential inauguration falls on a school day, that school day shall be designated as an MCPS system holiday. and that there will be an inauguration day scheduled for Wednesday, January 20th, 2021. So that will be a day that we'll need to take into account again in our calendar scenarios. And of course, going along with that, there's an election day in the fall. So again, those are 2 days that we'll need to build into our scenarios. Just want to outline again a couple of other elements of context that will inform our work on the calendar going forward. We do, of course, have a requirement to plan for snow and other weather or any kind of emergency closures. And so the school system must identify and schedule possible makeup days. And we do have requirements under the regulations to schedule makeup days both within the calendar year so that we can modify the calendar year if necessary during the year. And in addition, we have a responsibility to schedule days past the end of the calendar, I'm sorry, at the end of the instructional year. And so again, we will build those contingencies into our planning as well. The development of those contingencies will be facilitated a little bit by the lifting of the restrictions on the start and end day. Last spring, the board requested and we implemented a very comprehensive community survey of our community interests around the calendar and around various dates of observance and school closures. And again, just trying to really understand the input of our community around a wide variety of observances and other dates that can impact school closures. That survey information will still be very valuable context as we move forward to look through options and scenarios. And so again, that will continue to be information that we take recognition of and work into our context as we develop those scenarios. Another element that we'll want to consider very carefully is our practice on professional days. The previous practice, again going back before the constraints of the governor's order, was to have a full non-instructional day at the end of each quarter. That practice was not feasible during the constraints of the executive order. Again, we'll be in a different set of circumstances this year, and so we'll want to take a look again at that practice and how we can work that into our scenarios. And of course, another important context is the innovative school year, which we are embarking in a few short weeks on, starting our first calendar year of extended school time at 2 of our elementary schools. And in last year's calendar process, we did carry forward the development of the innovative school year calendar on a parallel and connected track with the regular calendar, and we'll do that again this year too as we go forward. So those are just, again, sort of an overview of the pieces that we'll be working with. Our practice, again, is to really start this conversation here with Policy Committee and have this dialogue around our direction at this point. We then will work to convene our internal stakeholders around developing, again, a range of functional scenarios for an instructional calendar. We would envision having a range of scenarios that would reflect, again, the differences that we may want to explore in terms of the possible start date before and after Labor Day, and in terms of, again, a number of the different variables that I've outlined here in terms of those educational or operational priorities. As well, of course, as always taking into account the things we have to do in terms of testing calendars and aligning our quarters and aligning our instructional program, and we'll work with our internal colleagues around that. And then we would anticipate bringing back to the Policy Management Committee in the fall, early fall, a range of possible scenarios, and then begin that more broad public feedback process that the board has engaged in the past couple of years of having those available for public comment and then working through a board review process.
Okay. Pat?
Yeah, I think it would be valuable to see how the calendar lays out with the end of the year, if you have with various scenarios, the pre-Labor Day start and post-Labor Day start. I think September 7th is about as late as Labor Day can be.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it would be a good exercise, valuable for the committee to see where it puts us in June, because I still believe the front end of the school year is the more productive, positive, get going than right now. I mean, especially with elementary kids, I hear, that the end of the school year is not as productive. So I think it would be good to see it. As I understand it, I think it's Anne Arundel County, which did modify their calendar for the 1920 school year, or somebody did, and what they chose to start before Labor Day, but whatever county I was reading chose to make it have the Friday before Labor Day off. I would like to know if what I had read is correct.
Yes, I believe that is. There have been a couple of those kinds of scenarios that our colleague counties have been working through, and we can bring back more specifics and forward those around to the board. As you're pointing out, though, with Labor Day being so late, that does, though, give us some flexibility to look at a range of scenarios that might still account for a long Labor Day weekend and have some alternative approaches to it without going super early.
Yeah, and I would also be in favor of us voting, at the time of adopting the calendar to eliminate the January 20th and closure for inauguration. As I understand it, that Monday of that week will be Martin Luther King Day, so we'd be closed on Monday, open Tuesday, and then closed Wednesday, which is obviously kind of ridiculous to have such a disruptive schedule that week.
And I don't know that's necessary.
Thank you. Any other
Yep.
concerns?
I just, just making sure that we know, because we're going to be looking at multiple options, and because of not necessarily the confusion, but the potential for confusion over whether we're starting before Labor Day, after Labor Day, just making sure that we get something out to the public as soon as possible so that we have plenty of time to get feedback, input, and then make changes, make decisions, and if we need to, be able to send something back out again, type of thing. So I know you all are already cognizant of it. I just wanted to kind of reiterate the importance that I think people are going to be weighing in on this year probably more than others. So, but maybe not.
Okay. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Alanya?
Yes, I just wanted to also echo the comments of Mrs. O'Neill. I think academically as well, for upper grade levels as well, when we think about when testing is and things like that, those dates never change no matter when we start school. And I know not just students but teachers also talk about how the losing those 2 weeks that once used to be there 3 years ago, where they could start instruction right away, especially for those classes where there's some kind of exam at the end of the year, APIB, whatever HSA has changed to, all of those things. So I definitely would advocate for an option now that we can that starts before Labor Day, especially because Labor Day is so late. It's so late. So yes.
Okay, thank you. So we can take this forward for the board to also give. It'll come back here. Okay, thank you.
Let's make us
Okay.
options.
All right, thank you. We're going to go on to curricular expenses for students, policy JNA.
Okay, good afternoon. And I believe what you were provided with ahead of the meeting was the policy, a copy of the policy, a copy of this year's annual memo around secondary course-related fees that is distributed to all principals and business school administrators, a copy of the final approval of course fees for this year, as well as the guidelines, which is an attachment packet for secondary course-related fees. So as the policy around curricular expenses states, schools have principals have parameter around charging curricular expenses for those items that would enhance the curriculum. It has to be tied to the curriculum, but any materials of instruction, items that are necessary, required, could not teach the curriculum without. It is the responsibility of the school system to provide. So examples of things that course fees could be provided or offered around would be things, if you look at our Edison Academy courses, those are very specialized technical courses. There are items there that are attached to licensing and licensure. Those are items that those students would purchase that they carry with them. That would be something that a fee would be allowed for. Courses in a regular art class or a required art class, the textiles and paints, those are things that are required and necessary for the curriculum. But if there is a project that is a take-home project, that's an extension, that is something where it would be permissible to charge a fee. So the policy outlines that, and that last packet, which are the guidelines for secondary course-related fees, gives some very specific examples of what a fee can be charged for and what is the responsibility of the school and the school system. In 2016, I believe, we started looking at taking a closer look at course fees, partly because of the board, a lot because of parent advocacy, and what we were seeing as a district as some variance among schools, and same class, same art class, different school, different course fee. And at the time, the guidelines around the course fees were pretty loose. We were offering a range of what might be acceptable for a course fee. So the art class might have had a range of anywhere from $5 to $20 for that same course. Mr. Murphy, who is here in the audience, there you are. Mr. Murphy, who's the director in the Office of Curriculum Instructional Programs, he and I worked together with a work group that was comprised of some parents, school business administrators, principals, and central office staff, particularly in the areas of art and music where we saw most of the discrepancy in fees. And we looked at several years worth of course fees and what had been approved, looking at patterns and trends. We also worked with our partners in the business office to look at patterns of spending in schools. And we did a deep analysis, really to look at what were the courses where fees were being charged, what types of items were being purchased with those fees, and what were the spending patterns in those schools that were charging fees. At some time during that point, we had some schools that had gone to a decision where they did not charge fees because they were seeing that the amount of spending that was being used for supplementing instruction, it was something that they could cover. And actually, Mr. Murphy, as a principal, had made that decision, and we were working with principals in our principal PLC to really look at and examine the course fees they were charging and how they were spending. Through the work of that work group, we did some revisions to expectations and guidelines. And rather than offering ranges, we went to set fees. So if you're enrolled in a certain course, this is the fee that you can be charged, based on the historical reference and frame for what materials and instruction that would be needed, recognizing the fact that there were some items that maybe previously were looped into a course fee or actually materials of instruction necessary for instruction that really fall on the responsibility of the school. And so the new memo, which I think we launched in 17-18, started laying out more specific guidelines so that when schools submit their requests for fees in the spring prior to the year of instruction, we are expecting them to have done an analysis of their instructional activity fund accounts. So we want to look at what has been spent, what fees were collected, how were the fees used in the prior year, what are your fund balances. We also wanted to make sure that when they submitted a request, it wasn't that it was just a request for art class and it's $10. We requested itemized list. Specifically, what will that $10 provide for that student? Because in that way, directors are now able to have very intentional conversations with schools when they submit their requests to say, you know what, $10 may not be the actual fee that you need to charge because some of these materials you've put into your request are actually materials of instruction. So we're having more specific conversations and focused conversations with schools around their fees. And as a result, now that we have recently done the approvals for 19-20, we're seeing fewer submissions of requests, and the requests that we are getting are more thoughtful and purposeful because there's actually this dialogue. It's not just we've always charged this particular fee for this course, and we just send it forward, there's an expectation that you're really thinking about what's needed for instruction and that we're aligning those practices.
Wow. Very complete report. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everybody does too. And to have them itemize what they've used and what they didn't use or didn't need is really important. You also mentioned things that students would pay for, and that would be like in cosmetology or in some tools that they'd have to purchase that would be their own. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So I assume that you're looking at, when you were looking at who's spending, trying to figure out how I want to frame this. So, we've heard concerns about inequity in art, for example, and, which some schools are given more money and use some and don't use as much. And so I'm hopeful that when you're looking at all of what you were just talking about, you're also looking at that and making sure that schools have the ability to offer. I'm just concerned about inequity both in and across our schools. And students who can't afford to pay for these materials, I wouldn't want anyone not to take a class because they don't want to be able to pay for the materials. And I know that frequently we offer scholarships, but a lot of people are, either don't know to ask or are embarrassed to ask or whatever. So I'm curious as to if a student takes a course, doesn't pay, I'm assuming we send them a notice and say, you're expected to pay $20 for this fee. If they don't, what happens? Like, do we let them go? Can we let it go? Do we have areas where it can be, put in for the child instead of hounding the parents about it?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
That's exactly correct. No student is excluded from instruction because they are unable to pay a fee or have not paid a fee. Okay. Sometimes we don't know the reason why the fee has not been paid. Right. Certainly there are families, and schools and principals know their families who have need, and they make those arrangements. But sometimes students have not paid a fee and we don't know their circumstances, but the fee is unpaid. But instruction cannot be denied because a fee has not been paid. And certainly the students still have access to everything that their peers have in that classroom.
That makes me very happy to hear. So thank you. And like I said, just as you're checking into, you already mentioned you're doing it, but I appreciate the fact that you're looking at who's spending what and making sure that there's equity in and among our schools. So
thank you.
And I know that schools sometimes have funds that they put aside just for that purpose. Anything else?
Yes, I just had one comment. I think that, as Ms. Mondrowski said, I think that this is very important, but I also think that it's important to acknowledge that, yes, these are some of the costs that we've pointed out, per se, that come with these courses that we're trying to kind of rid of, but then there are also a lot of unspoken costs that you really do need to undertake to truly have the most comfortable school experience. For example, in this day and age, I mean, without some kind of device that can give you Wi-Fi access, it's very hard to do every single assignment that you're assigned, especially as you get past 7th grade. But that being said, we don't necessarily count that as something, because as a school system at this point in time, we can't provide every student with a computer or something. But I know we're looking into it in Dr. Zuckerman's office, talking about possible Chromebook takeout programs that go with the Wi-Fi, so that students, because everything is on Google Classroom or MCPS Classroom or something. So my point being in relation to this topic is that it's really important that we do whatever we can to take out some of these things that are more explicit, that we can do something about as a system, because the unspoken costs, I mean, it's from pens and pencils to computers. Again, we can't quite do as much about those things yet, so I think this is a step forward in making sure we do whatever's in our power to really ensure that everyone's on that equitable playing field in terms of their resources at home.
Thank you. Any other?
Well, I think that, we've been pushing to periodically review the issue of course fees, because the Maryland Constitution guarantees a free education, and in that spirit, so limiting where there are, I guess, consumable take-home. What about the issue with, like, a cooking course? How does that fall in? I know the music and art had been up there, but
Right.
and I think it's really important that schools are really looking at what are they actually spending.
And that was one of the reasons when we upgraded and enhanced the process, we actually not just have them look at it, they have to submit their fund balances for those courses, because we really want it to be a purposeful exercise in looking at the budgeting and the funding for those activities. In reference to those classes where there are cooking items and things like that, if it's a consumable, so they would have, that's the reason to validate having a fee, is because you're preparing something that you're actually going to consume as part of the class. But certainly that would be a nominal fee. You're not spending $30 every time you cook something. And I think for
Cooking
the most,
utensils may not be charged.
right, the utensils may not, but for
No,
the food,
Oh, we charge them.
right.
And Ms. Tataconda raises a valid point about the technology, and I know Pete Chevanini and Dr. Zuckerman have been working, with, Comcast, and I think that Verizon is also a partner about internet access and looking at take-home devices, because we do need to provide a level playing field.
Absolutely.
But, I also happen to think that we need to somehow work with partners to make sure that there's grant funding at Edison, because some of the kits,
Can
some
be
of the tools
expensive.
are pretty expensive.
Cosmetology is very expensive.
Yes.
It is. Yeah. And when we're talking about some of the other items that are not kits or culinary arts kinds of things, I think teachers have been very cognizant of the needs of the students, and so they try to make adaptations where they can, so we appreciate that. Any other comments on this? Okay. All right, this can go forward then. All right. The next one. Where's my list? Okay, we're going to be doing JEE, student transfers, and I'll turn that over to Ms. Williams. And
Okay.
I want to thank Ms. McGuire, too. I forgot to thank you for your comprehensive information about the calendar, and thank you, Dr. Labat, also. Okay. All right, Ms. Williams?
Okay, thank you. So as the committee is very well aware, we have been taking a close examination of policy JEE, student transfers, over the last year or so, particularly in response to a new business item by Mrs. Dixon requesting that the committee take this closer look at the policy. And we're going to spend some time today bringing you up to date on where we are in terms of sort of considering circumstances for permitting a transfer, and what we think what our work will look like going forward. First of all, there are 4 primary areas of consideration at this time for as to whether or not we have the right language and process in place, or whether we should or should not permit transfers for these 4 specific categories. These categories are unique hardships, specifically in instances of medical, emotional, or social or adjustment types of issues, children of staff members, academic transfers, and when there are instances of middle school articulation when the child is attending middle school on a COSA. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the first 2 categories because we think that each one of these subtopics by themselves merit significant conversation. So I'm going to just remind you, sort of give you a recollection of what the top issues were for the first two, and we're spending our time today primarily on academic transfers and with middle school articulation embedded there. So with respect to unique hardships, our current language says that a student may apply for a COSA when a documented hardship is shown, and that's as specific as the policy states. It says in our regulation that I'm sorry, not in our regulation. It says in some of our neighboring jurisdictions, we've seen their regulations that have more documentation that's required. So our documentation is less specific, or reference to documentation is less specific than many of our neighboring districts. So possibly we could consider clarifying or providing other language regarding documentation or other issues around equity implications. So we are recommending that this particular topic be set aside for the next Policy Management Committee meeting.
And I just wanted to add that while we're also watching, and we've included in the packet materials from the State Board, which is also looking at this precise issue. So we are closely monitoring that as this committee does its work as well.
The next area that we think and has been discussed by the committee, by the full board and staff for further consideration is children of staff members. Currently, MCPS staff members must demonstrate a unique hardship to obtain a COSA for their child, the same as any other families. We hear often from our families our staff members who are also student families, that the COSAs would help them for logistically to have their child attending the school where they teach. So removal of the requirement to demonstrate a unique hardship could be considered. Particularly for certain staff, to create incentives for staffing specifically identified schools, such as our Title I or focus schools, or innovative calendar schools. Again, this is a topic that we recommend for a future Policy Management Committee meeting. We wanted to be sure you knew we hadn't forgotten about it as we direct our attention to academic transfers. Policy JEE does not identify academic transfers or programmatic preferences as a basis for receiving a COSA. So it's not addressed at all in the policy, and the regulation JEERA, however, specifically states that program and course preferences do not constitute a unique hardship absent other compelling factors. So you will recall, so today we're going to focus on academic reasons that students might seek transfers from their home schools. Of course, you will recall that at the May 30th meeting, you received a presentation regarding countywide programs and regional programs. The topic for today's discussion is local, multi-year programs and multi-course sequences that are available at and only at individual schools. So Mr. Murphy is going to take a few minutes to walk us through the variety of courses that are available for which students might want to transfer. And then after he finishes that walkthrough for us, then we'll have a conversation about instances in which the board may be interested in permitting such transfers and implications that may flow from them.
Good afternoon, Scott Murphy, Director of Secondary Curriculum and District-Wide Programs. As Ms. Williams just said, on May 30th, we spent a good amount of time talking about our vision for regional programs. And so before I get into some of the specifics in local schools, just keeping in mind that the programs that are of the highest demand from students, highest demand in the economy, highest demand in terms of the college and career programs that our students are interested in, we are developing a regional models so that students can access those by application and make decisions in grade 8 so that the programs can begin from day 1 in grade 9. That connects to the vision we talked about for Seneca Valley, and so some of the programs that we're bringing there, as well as the new vision for Edison and a new partnership with Wheaton to ensure that kind of regional access to the programs that are of highest demand. But we still have other local programs that are also of interest to students. And so for the purposes of today, we've put them in sort of 5 buckets of the types of programs that are in our local schools that seem to bubble up when we have this conversation about academic programs and student interest. The first is, I can barely read it, so I'm going to go to the bigger.
Yeah, we have it, but
Yeah, thank you.
it's kind of small.
The first bucket is programs at local schools that require an application, but they have widely available. They use widely available courses. So, for example, there's what's known as the APEX program at Walter Johnson, or what's known as the APPS program at Clarksburg. These programs take existing courses that are widely available in all of our schools, package them, and have students apply for them in 8th grade. And then those schools schedule those students in academic cohorts starting in 9th grade, creating kind of a smaller learning community. But the courses themselves are the core academic courses that are offered in all of the schools. The second bucket is programs that also are widely available courses, but don't necessarily require an application. These are often referred to as signatures or academies. One example is a journalism academy that's at one of our high schools. They've used this package of courses to define the signature program in journalism, but the courses themselves are actually the same journalism courses that are widely available in most or all high schools. It's just a matter of how the schools create it. It's kind of a local signature, a local theme, a smaller learning community at that school using widely available courses that are available. The third bucket is typically our career readiness programs that aren't part of the regional model and do not require an application. That might be, for example, our culinary arts or restaurant programs. One is at Edison, but may not be as expansive up county. Another example is a biotechnology program that is only at Northwest High School. So we do have some of those career programs that are very unique to individual schools. The fourth bucket is similar, but aren't necessarily the career readiness programs. This is most common in the languages. So a school that offers a full course sequence in a language like Japanese or German, or as you know, we have the NJROTC programs in some of our schools, but not all. So those would be examples of those course sequences that are not everywhere. And then the last bucket is just kind of a singleton course that a student may be interested in or be ready for that isn't offered everywhere. One example is multivariable calculus, the class you take after AP calculus. Typically, some schools don't have the numbers to run that class every year, so it might be offered only at a select group of high schools. But again, just a single course, not a full sequence of study.
Is there a reason why a student would need a course like that specifically? In other words, is it just not offered, if it's not offered at a school because there's not enough kids to make it worth holding a class or reasonable to hold a class, would there be a scenario where someone is looking at a career pathway that would require them to take a specific course of some sort? Because to me, there's a difference between those two things. In other words, there's a difference to me to someone who says, I want to take Japanese and they don't offer it at my school, so I want to go to a different school, to someone who says, I want to be a Japanese interpreter, and if I don't have this Japanese class, then I can't do that as a profession. Do we have classes like that?
I'm not thinking of an example. I think in those cases, any sort of required course as part of the sequence would be part of the package. It wouldn't be a standalone course. So that example of multivariable calculus, for example, it's not required as any part of the career pathways, but many of our students come out of junior year ready for the next level in mathematics. And there are many options in mathematics. They could take a statistics course, they could take a dual enrollment course, but multivariable calculus is the appropriate next course for many students in mathematics. So, but not necessarily part of a package sequence.
But they could also take that at the college, correct? Something like that.
You want to continue the sequence. I mean,
Right.
if you want to become an engineer or a scientist or a mathematician,
Right.
And your local high school doesn't offer multivariable calculus. I mean, whether I mean, I know AP statistics would probably be the next sequence if you didn't have it. But I think we have more and more kids who are beginning that trajectory, you know, earlier. You know, if you're taking compacted math or, you know, doing, you know, algebra by grade 7 as opposed to grade 8, you're on a sequence. So if your high school doesn't offer it, you know, it is you are at a disadvantage, you know, because math is something you need to continue on if you're pursuing, you know, if you want to pursue engineering or in the field of science.
Yes, I agree, and I also feel that though I don't have a solution to this problem, I do feel that it's a major issue if you just happen to go to a school where there are fewer students who want to take multivariable calculus, and now all of a sudden, because you're only one of 5 rather than being 1 in 20 at the next door school, you don't get to take the class. I definitely think we need to come up with a creative solution to that, because that's a problem.
There is the solution of taking it at Montgomery College.
Right, that's what
and we had also at various points talked about remote learning, you know, via, you know,
Right.
you know.
Internet.
But the reality of what we're dealing with now is about looking at academic transfers for that kid that's on that. Where does the Ulysses program
Yeah, I was gonna ask that too.
fall? Is
that a signature program?
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
May provide some clarification, and then we can, I just think that might be helpful.
Yeah, so I'll go back through the 5 buckets with a little bit more detail.
Okay.
Again, the first is a local program where there's an application. Typically, students in grade 8 apply, and it's a series of related courses that are widely available at most high schools. It's typically defined by those groupings of students who are a smaller learning community, capstone projects senior year, and are a full-time comprehensive experience. Ulysses is an example of that one, where there's an application process for a local program. The other examples I talked about were the Apex at WJ and APS at Clarksburg, and there are a couple of others. But these grew out of local school interest in creating what we called a signature to sort of define the academic program or create a smaller learning community, and they've popped up over the years at different times for different reasons, and so those are one area that are special programs, but again, they're courses that are offered in every high school. The second bucket was the journalism example, they're also comprised of courses that are widely available, but there's no application. It's sort of open interest, open access in certain high schools, and these are typically referred to also as signatures or academies. The journalism example is one where students take a sequence of journalism courses, maybe culminating in a TV production course, being the editor of the paper, those types of things, which are opportunities that are available in all of our schools. It's just not necessarily defined as a thematic academy or signature at all of our schools in that example.
Sorry, I thought signature programs you did have to apply for.
No,
So so the Ulysses program in Northwest, that's a signature program, correct?
That's an application program.
Okay, I thought it was a signature program.
But you're making the distinction between applying outside of the school versus applying inside the school, right?
Actually,
Right.
Ulysses is inside the school, so you can only apply if you go to the school, but I thought you still had to apply. Not just anybody could go.
Yes, it's an application program for the local students. But some academies, what we call signatures, are open to anyone in the school. And so the Journalism Academy, for example, the example that we're using, would be open to any student in the school who's interested.
I think we're trying to, because sometimes we can get hung up on terminology, we're trying to clarify the identifying factors within within each of the 5 buckets Mr. Murphy has. Some schools use different names, and so we're trying to have descriptors of the types of courses.
And I think part of our challenge is we tend to use words like signature and academy and pathway and program interchangeably. So we're trying to be explicit about some of the distinctions with applications, with non-applications, with what are full sequences versus standalone courses. So the third is typically a career and technology education or career readiness program that is, again, open to all students of interest in a local school. These would be a series of related courses that are not offered everywhere. For example, biotechnology. There was a Northwest High School developed a unique biotechnology program of study that is only available at Northwest High School. It's a 4-credit pathway in biotechnology that starts in 9th grade. It's something that is of significant demand, but hasn't ramped up to that regional model yet. So current state would be it's only available at Northwest High School as a full, complete program of courses that typically require full-time enrollment. The next bucket is those local unique course sequences that aren't necessarily the career programs like ROTC or I'm trying to remember the other example I said earlier. Yes, languages, most common in world languages. Those, again, schools based on student interest, based on community interest, have developed programs in languages over the years. And so some of the less commonly taught languages are only offered in a few schools and are part of a full course sequence where you could really get into the upper levels and even towards the seal of biliteracy, where it's a sequence of several courses over 4 years in languages. Same thing with ROTC, where it would be a package of courses that students would take over time. We did mention, as has already come up in this conversation, that there are currently alternatives that we use for some of these programs. So, for example, schools now have students who remain enrolled in their home school and go to a neighboring school for ROTC part-time and come back to their home school. So those alternatives exist, as well as the exploration of more virtual, more remote learning. We've done this before with multivariable calculus. We've done this with languages. We're trying to develop the technology to do it more systematically. But in cases where there's 6 students enrolled in school A and 6 students enrolled in school B and 15 in school C, rather than busing all the students to one spot, creating a virtual solution for that is viable and something we're working to develop. Then the last bucket that we did talk about was the unique standalone course, like the multivariable calculus example, which again, currently we do have schools who work together. So it's common for our high schools to, in a neighboring region of the county, to schedule multivariable calculus first period. So students from neighboring schools can access it and then return to their home school. So that's a solution that is used currently for a situation like multivariable calculus when there's not a critical mass to run the course in a given year. So that current state on that example is the students attend for a period and return back to their home school and do not transfer. So that's a snapshot of the current state. Again, we put them in those 5 areas to help with the conversation because of the way that we have terminologies that's used in different ways.
Is to start thinking about here we go. Okay. Thank you. So we want to now give some thought to, now that we have sort of clarified our language, what we're talking about in terms of classes or courses or programs that students may wish to transfer to a school other than their home school. I want to think about whether a student should be able to transfer to a high school to attend another high school's local program or course offering. Some options you might consider are no, that's kind of the current state. The policy does not permit that. You might consider permitting it on a first-come, first-served basis and processing it through our existing COSA process. Or you may consider more of a managed deadline with a process specific to these core courses. If the board were to consider establishing a managed process around academic transfers, the board might consider whether it's only if space is available after all local students have enrolled, or may this board consider requiring schools to reserve a certain number of seats for out-of-area students. Before we jump into that, I just want to give you a few other things to think about, and we'll come back to that question. Think about what are the possible implications for permitting a high school student to transfer to another high school to participate in a unique local program or course sequence. First, we have the issue of transportation. We've referenced some times, Mr. Murphy talked about the student who went to another high school to take that multivariable calculus or the ROTC program, and they sometimes there may have been transportation, but more often there's not. So if we widely allow transfers for participation in courses, might that be considered an equity issue, because not all students have that flexibility. Also, not all students know that there is the opportunity. We don't presently make it known that if you want to take the multivariable calculus or the 4 years of Japanese or participate in a program of some sort, you're not aware of that. So one student, a group of students might find out that it's a possibility and another group not. So what are we going to have to do in terms of communication? Then there's just fairness. The implications to the local schools, the local students at the school hosting the program, who may have been denied access to a local program if an out-of-area student gets it, or could they be denied access if an out-of-area student were permitted to attend? These are just things to think about. We need to think about the capacity factor. Should a school that's over capacity be open to academic transfers? Must schools reserve seats in their local programs for students not in their attendance area? And then I mentioned at the beginning of the categories of transfers that we'll be talking about, the middle school to high school articulation. Currently, the policy says that if a student has received a COSA in middle school, they may articulate to the high school in the feeder pattern without having to demonstrate a unique hardship or any other reason to attend. So if the board were to permit student transfers for course sequences unique to certain high schools, in particular certain world languages, would that address the needs of a student who attended a middle school other than their home school for programmatic reasons? So after those things to think about, I bring you back to the question of should students be able to transfer to a high school to attend a local program or course offering? For your discussion.
Yeah, I know that we've done that in the past. I know that middle schools who have not had the advanced math courses have allowed students to go for one period to a local school. I don't know who did the transportation, whether it was the parents or whether it was the school system, and that is a concern. And we've been saying on our appeals that you cannot transfer based on a course that you want. So we've got to really look at this to see if we want to make some changes there, because we know that people do school shop like that. They want to be in certain clusters, so they say that they really want a particular course, but may not stay in that course. So that's just another issue. I'm gonna. Oh, you don't have your lights on. Okay.
Well, there are, a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I mean, the programs at both Northwest and Walter Johnson, the Ulysses and Apex, I mean, both those schools are overcrowded dramatically overcrowded right now. And they have special, I guess, application programs for their home students. I mean, if there are if kids are allowed to transfer to those schools, I mean, they have a cap, currently do they have a cap on those, the number of kids in both Ulysses and Apex?
Yeah.
So then would it might be possible that there wouldn't be enough seats for the home school kids, and the schools are both already overcrowded. I mean, to me, capacity not just within the program, but school capacity is a mitigating factor. And the other piece is about transportation. You know, we don't provide transportation for COSAs, and you know, it is an equity issue. Who can be transporting their child for that special program, that course sequence? I know, you know, we had an appeal at one point about ROTC, a kid who went to Seneca Valley, I guess the first 2 periods for NJROTC, but wanted to be able to be part of the whole program, because I guess it includes after-school activities at the school. You know, the equity issue about transportation is a problem. And then the other thing is our transfer policy, if you receive a COSA, the eligibility for athletics is another question, because, you know, it's entirely possible that some top-notch athlete might choose to request a transfer to a football or basketball powerhouse because they offer some unique course. I mean, I don't have answers for all of these, but I see these as possible problems.
Yes, I agree on the transportation piece as well. But I also wanted to say that I do think there is a degree of merit to being interested in a local program, more so than a single course offering, yes, but especially a program. And really that's on the system, right? Because they don't necessarily have that much insight on where certain programs are when they decide where to live, per se. And so I do think that if we set down clearly what the parameters are and what criteria students have to meet to be able to do a COSA for a program, then I think that it is something that we should explore. But that being said, I think there are different ways that we can address some of the issues that Ms. O'Neill and Dr. Daka brought up. And I'm sure Ms. Mondrasky will bring up as well. But with regards to the schools shopping, for example, if there's a program that exists at school X and school Y, and the parents are talking about the program, and school X is over capacity and school Y is not, then if the program is their intention, then they should be fine with going to school Y. So that's kind of like one way that we can really look at resolving this issue while keeping capacity in mind. The transportation equity issue, I mean, it would really, I imagine, depend on the volume of students who are going from location X to location Y, but if there's one student, then it's not going to be economically, what's the right word?
Well, we don't provide
sound, yeah, right? So we don't provide the transportation for that
but
reason.
My point is, some parents may not be able to transport
Exactly,
their children.
so that is a problem.
It is,
Yeah.
it's a you know.
Yeah.
Well, the kids may not have cars, and public transportation in Montgomery County, it's not like we're living in D.C. or in a more urbanized area where there is easy access to transportation that could transport you. I mean, DC doesn't provide transportation for non-special ed students in the District of Columbia, so, but, you know, Montgomery County, it's not so easy.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess I have to say, you know, Ulysses program was developed, I mean, in my view, when we put in the magnet at Poolsville, it was intended to sort of stop a brain drain from Northwest High School, to keep kids at wanting to go to Northwest High School. It's been very successful, and now kids from out of Northwest clamor to go there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, it's done that, but I don't know.
So we started talking about this, I guess, 5 years ago when Ms. Ortman-Baus and I asked us to look into this because of the appeals that were coming to us. And it has since grown because then we started the choice study and all of that kind of stuff. And we said, let's wait to look at changing the policy till after that was done. And here we are. So for me, a lot of what I think of in these things is the appeals that we see. And I don't know if some of this, like, I don't support changing for getting a school change for a single class, frankly, because I think there are other ways at looking at addressing that concern. And I think that if someone takes a class in 10th grade or wants to take a 10th grade course and they switch schools, does that mean they get to continue out through the rest of the years after the schools, or do they have to go back? I do think that but I do support the idea of students who are passionate about a program being able to attend there if there's capacity, especially if there's capacity, or even if both schools are over capacity, but one's more over capacity than the other. But I also think that if we start going down that pathway, then the students must be able to demonstrate that they're continually successfully enrolled in the course. So I wouldn't want someone to apply for a transfer based on a course in 9th grade, and then by 10th grade they're not taking it anymore, but they think that they're going to stay. To me, it's very similar to the COSA's the regulation about attendance and stuff. And I think that there are ways that we can look at being able to say, if this is why you're really doing it, and we make this consideration as a unique hardship for your particular situation, fine, but it's going to be monitored, and it's not a given that you get to stay. My colleagues have all touched on concerns that we've have all been talking about forever, and I think there isn't anybody who doesn't realize the potential negative implications or the complications that could arise from any of these changes. For me, some of it is really just about being able to having the opportunity to look at some of these things on a case-by-case basis, on a person-by-person situation. And my issue with the way the policy is right now is that we basically say, nope, it doesn't matter. And to me, that's what our job is supposed to be able to look at what is your particular situation, what is and make determinations based on that. So I don't really know what the point of why I'm rambling on about all this is. I'm just thinking aloud in terms of how I feel like we got here, and I don't know what all of the right answers are, but I do have a real problem with us restricting kids from participating in something that they're passionate about, particularly if there is space. And there's, we had a student who applied for a COSA to attend the aviation program at Magruder. They were coming from a massively overcrowded school and wanted to go to an under-enrolled school, but we had to say no because we don't do that. I have a problem with that. I think
the aviation is open. It had a cap on this number of kids, and that's a different case. Because that program has a specific number of kids. So
right. But I didn't get the impression that the program was capped. I thought that we just wouldn't let them transfer because they were coming from a different school.
The program was capped,
okay.
So
well, let's just pretend
the program
it was a different
capped.
program then. I'm just saying.
I think the board's interest is to make it easier for students to transfer. I think we have, if that's, and that's, as I see my colleagues, that's the desire of the board. But the problem is it can't just be willy-nilly. It's got to be in the policy. What are those circumstances that make it easier? Because otherwise then we're arbitrary and capricious. And so we need to establish the criteria that we, want to see. I still believe capacity has to be an issue. And,
I totally agree with
and
that.
that is going to be a challenge because we know that for the next decade, our high schools are going to be overcrowded.
Yep.
But, so Josh,
So I think that looking again at the slide, I think one of the pieces in guidance for the committee to consider is, to Ms. O'Neill's point about the board providing guidance in the policy, the question is, on this particular subject of academic transfers, we'll call it, if the board wants to open up a process for permitting academic transfers, there are a variety of different ways of going, and so it would be helpful to have direction, initial take from the committee, and then we could come back at the next session and, based on that direction, try to sketch it out. And so one could be very great detail in the policy. Another could be more like what we do with the countywide programs, where essentially the board directs the superintendent and staff to create a process for managing transfers from students to programs at other schools that have capacity for seats or for applications, and through some sort of managed process. That's sort of three. And I think that if you went that way, one of the things we just have to think about is it that seats are reserved in advance, or is it that there are capacity trumps everything, and so you look at only after you've filled up all with local slots, and or that's delegated, and it just is a statement in the policy that the superintendent shall develop a process for managing requests from students to apply to a program in another school, taking into account capacity, interest. I'm making up language. So that those are some of the options that the committee has, and if the committee members were to give us guidance, we could take our stab at coming with proposed language consistent with that guidance.
This is ranging everywhere. And as the county grew and we added programs, we added these restrictions, and they just don't match. I'm reluctant to say that we can, I'm going to give it to staff to figure it out. No. But, transportation capacity is really important. Transportation, and when we talked about equity, making sure that people knew about the programs and that there was equity in getting into them. So there's a lot to think about here, because this has been driving me crazy ever since I've been on the board, because we have appeals and we have to say no to so many things, and it's just, and one thing doesn't work with another thing. If we let them go for ROTC, how come we're not letting them go for Japanese? It's just, it's overwhelming.
I think, that everybody would like to find a process that makes it more open for students to be able to transfer for
At least be
courses,
considered. Right.
And I think your suggestion of asking the superintendent staff to come up with a process is a step in the right direction.
I agree. We have kids who have brought with them a demonstration of coursework that they've taken starting like in elementary school to head in a certain direction, and then, like I said, the way it is now, it's just the doors automatically shut. And the verbiage that you gave us in terms of trying to put something together to present as an option, I think is a really good one, just because at least then, like I said, this for me originally came up when I joined the board and started hearing about how we just, nope, it's in our policy, we don't do that. And
well, one of the reasons our policy is the way it is, we had a case that went to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that we appealed to the Supreme Court. And so the policy was adopted following all those adverse decisions. It's not our fault that the Supreme Court wouldn't hear us. Right. It's not our fault that the Fourth Circuit ruled against us. We had a policy that, allowed when I got here, allowed for transfers, but with to prevent racially isolated schools. That we lost all the way through the courts, up through the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. And this policy was adopted, very narrowly tailored, based upon the decision at the time. The Fourth Circuit is a pretty darn, other short of being at the Supreme Court. So we have to live with that policy unless we change it. But it's not because we just wanted to be arbitrary.
This isn't about placing blame or anything.
No,
I'm just
saying that's why we are where we are.
Right.
So I think there is a desire to make it easier for students to transfer for academic purposes. I think we need to have a process, and I think we all need to recognize there are capacity issues in our high schools. Right. But, a student who is a math whiz whose home high school is not, they know in 7th grade that they're on a trajectory, or 6th grade that they're on a trajectory, and they're not planning to go to the Blair Magnet, should have the option, to transfer.
And
Should have the option to take that multivariable calculus.
And just
need
to clarify, so we understand the sentiments of the committee as we look at this. So if you look at this, the slide that's up, the question is, should a student be able to transfer to a high school to attend a local course offering? Where if we had an X, it could work out. We would X out the first one, which was no, essentially the current policy. And it sounds like there's not much interest in going to 2, which is the first come first serve, open ended. So we're thinking more in a managed process that takes into account in some ways capacity.
Yeah, and I know that we're already talking about out of area seats for Seneca Valley and Edison. I don't know whether that's going to come out or not, but some students may want to stay for the full day at Edison or the full day at Seneca Valley. So that would
But I was
be
told that they can do that.
out of
They will, that's
area
part of it,
seat-
yeah.
out of area.
And to be clear, this
seats.
is for programs that are not designated as countywide programs.
Yeah.
So we
Right.
already have managed
Right.
choice processes
Right.
or managed application process or interest process for countywide and regional programs. This is for non-programs.
But we never saved seats for these students before.
Correct.
So that's a little bit different.
So,
And I don't know that we need, I don't personally think that we necessarily need to reserve seats for out of areas. I do think it.
Oh, no,
you
I
know,
don't mean that. I
could
meant
con-
for the Edison and
Oh,
Seneca
yeah,
Valley.
yes, well, and we're
Not
definitely
for
doing that.
anything else.
No. But I think that, again, to me, if there's just a way of looking at it, so, we could still call it a unique, because I do think that there are certain things that should be taken into account and looked at, including, are there other opportunities to take, especially if it's like a course type of thing, could they take it online or in a virtual setting? Could they take it at Montgomery College if they're close enough and have easy enough access? Are there other things? Then, to me, those should all be taken into consideration before something would be approved as well. So that's why I'm saying I guess I feel like having a process for the superintendent and his office and then the board ultimately to make decisions on a case-by-case basis is still, seems to me,
I think so. Just I'm making sure that we have good direction, because I think one approach would be that these come in a case by case basis to the board. Another would be that, I'm just making this up, that by a certain deadline you submit if you're interested in program X at Y school. If there's capacity, we choose among, for the 2 seats that remain, or 10 seats that remain, or 20 seats that remain, we choose from among the 50 students that are interested. But then that would be the process for that. So if somebody then would come subsequently and say, having missed the deadline and been able to access the deadline and knew about it, that process will have come and gone, just like with some of our other processes. Right. But there are 2 different approaches. One is the very much case by case, another is the managed process.
I think the managed process, I also think that the ability for the child who wants to participate in ROTC I mean, the sequence, it's a commitment, it's not just the one class, 1 year, it's a commitment. The other question I have is, what about this, we automatically from 8th grade, from middle school to high school, do we need to reconsider that piece as well in this process?
Yeah, I vote for that.
I know that's a
Yes,
separate.
totally vote for that.
It's
Yeah.
separate from this one, but I think we also need to.
We think that it's a separate issue, but is very much in alignment with this, because if you guide us to come up with a managed process, course sequences such as world languages, where the student can't continue as they would if they had continued on to. So, for example, most of our, if not every, high school has French and Spanish, but we have Chinese immersion programs, and not every high school has Chinese. So that might be reason to consider permitting a transfer so that they can continue with the programming that they have participated in thus far.
Yes.
And so this process could open that up, and that would address that category of student.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree that we need a managed process, and that we can, from that point on, go individually as they come across our desks or across the hearing desks. But we do need to kind of pull it together. It's just very loose right now and contradictory. So thank you.
Okay.
Take it back to you.
All right. Thank you for your direction.
Are there any other comments? No?
No, I guess I just have a question, though, Stephanie and Josh, about the athletic waiver.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these students where they're admitted, right now they have to apply for a waiver unless they're automatic from 8th grade to high school, right? But, I want to be in a position that we're not having kids just transfer to create powerhouse teams,
So when we come back, because I think we will be coming back on the other topics that Ms. Williams mentioned, including transfers for children of staff and the unique hardship standard, and then with some language ideas for the academic transfers, we can also bring back some data and discussion about the athletic waiver, non-waiver piece as well.
Yeah. And it's not just the students who might want to go to a powerhouse thing. We've got to watch the coaching, because that's how we got the regulation in the first place, because coaches were doing that, grabbing kids from out of their schools.
Ananya?
Yes, I just wanted to say, with the choice conversation, however, I would hope that there's less need for transfer for academic programs, because we're expanding access. And then I know with the choice expansion, we talked about transportation being part of that aspect, so then we can make sure that there's not an equity issue there. So to the extent possible, I think that aspect will really help this whole conversation. But I still do think that the program-based transfers are something we need to look at, because it still won't be like there'll be a program at every student's home high school that matches their interests. But I do think it's a good opportunity to relieve the transportation inequity if we place programs in a well-distributed manner across the county.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to policy COA, student well-being and school safety. And we have some other persons coming to the table.
Yes, Mr. Clark and Ms. Connolly, Dr. Connolly are joining us for the discussion. So on May 14th, the board tentatively adopted policy COA, student well-being and school safety, and the policy was sent out for public comment from May 15th through June 5th. The draft policy and the opportunity to provide public comment were widely advertised. It was included in the MCPS bulletin, the MCPS quick notes and need to know, MCPS Chief of Staff's communications updates to principals, MCPS press releases. We had MCPS and board tweets in both English and Spanish, and information links were provided on the MCPS website main page. The MCPS policy comment page provided a one-page summary of the new policy in English, Spanish, French, Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, and Amharic. The full draft policy was also available in Spanish. A link to the policy comment page was provided directly to countywide law enforcement officials, all of our MCPS action achievement groups. Via Ms. Tadakanda's support, we shared it with the student member of the Board Advisory Council and the Montgomery County region of the Maryland Association of Student Councils. So we appreciate that student engagement, level of student engagement as well. In addition to our efforts, it was also publicized in 2 articles in the Bethesda magazine, as well as a story on WTOP. So we certainly had a lot of coverage, and as a result, to date, we have received 96 comments from the public on this policy. 96 comments is a great response for the community. You have received the comments, each member of the board, you have received the comments, and some of the comments had confidential information included, student and or school specific name or information. So we prepared a second set that redacted the personal information for the public viewing. So all 96 are available, but those that are available to the public do not contain the level of personal and confidential information that the board has received in full. And with that number, it's hard for us to respond to each and every one of them, but we did identify several themes. Several themes emerged, and so you have sort of a summary of those comments grouped thematically and a board response. We did, and I'll go through those in a moment, but we received comments from the whole spectrum of our community: staff members, parents, guardians, staff members who are also parents, guardians. We only received a couple, but we did receive MCPS students, and we even received some from persons who identify themselves as members of the community, MCPS community, but not necessarily a parent, staff person, or a student. So I'll just quickly go through for you some of the themes that emerged and the highlights of our responses to the themes. So we received quite a number of comments regarding a need for additional mental health professionals in the schools. They are the front line, and certainly we rely on them heavily. It's noted that the board has increased staffing allocations in every budget cycle since FY 2017, and in order to decrease student-to-counselor ratios so that there are more counselors available to students, or counselors have fewer students to serve, just decreasing that ratio. And similarly, at the same time frame, this board increased staffing allocations for psychologists, social workers, pupil personnel workers, and others to support student social and psychological needs. Another theme was a noted need for cameras. This was addressed significantly. The use of our cameras is addressed significantly in the safety and school safety and security report. And a few highlights that include, currently all middle and high school have cameras, and a commitment has been made to increase the incorporation of cameras for the elementary school levels. But right now, all schools are equipped with our access control systems, which have cameras at the entrances so that you can see who's seeking to enter a building.
Do the back of all of our schools now have those access entry things with cameras on them as well?
Not on necessarily on the back side of the school buildings there's a certain number of card readers, but the actual visual cameras on the front entranceway to all of our school buildings with the new visitor management system. There are exterior cameras placed at the high school and different middle school levels.
So if someone comes up to the back door of a school, they can't,
There's no visualization.
They're not.
sorry, go ahead.
The purpose of, part of the purpose of that is that we really do want people to come in to the front door. So the other doors would be locked, so they can't just come into the back. The issue with having that, again, that access control system where we have the visual, that's all at the front, so that the front office can manage that. The back doors are locked. We do have some, as Mr. Clark was saying, some with a badge reader, but that's really just for school use, so that the schools can come in from recess or what have you, but we don't really want our visitors going to anywhere other than the main entrance.
Right, I just didn't know if they could push a button and the office could say, you have to come around to the front. Or anything like that. Okay. I will say, in terms of the person's comments, this is something that we've talked about in different scenarios in reference to randomly screening videos. We've talked about it in terms of our buses and in our schools and stuff like that, and I do think that could potentially be a valuable addition to the policy.
Another category of comments focused around student use of digital devices. And so we referenced that both in IGTRA, which is user responsibility for computer systems, and COGRA, which is our personal mobile devices, students are made aware of both their rights and responsibilities in terms of using these devices during the school day or on school property, and the school student code of conduct sets forth consequences for violating either of those regulations in the use of their digital devices. And there was also a reference in some of our comments about privacy, data privacy, and so forth. And we're noting that the board is in the process of developing a policy on educational technology in which we intend to address data privacy and screen time. Bullying and cyberbullying continued to be as a continued issue in the schools. Was another thematic area. Our curriculum addresses bullying. We talk about our new platform through Be Well 65, as well as the online reporting system that is intended to come on board for the fall. That's going to assist us with investigating, tracking, and monitoring complaints of bullying. The next area is regarding training and protection for school staff, and we reference again the school safety and security report, in which one of the recommendations is to provide enhanced securities training for principals, administrators, and other school staff who are expected to intervene in situations where students are confrontational. We had some comments around the use of e-cigarettes, vaping, juuling, that kind of thing, and those are addressed in our student code of conduct. A reference to the use of locking the doors and entry and exit points being closed and locked, and morning drop-off of the staff needing to be stationed. So in policy COA, we address the need to manage access to schools and facilities, as well as to manage visitors and to schools and facilities. There's reference to the need for staff and parents to be trauma-informed. This is addressed in the policy in section C1 under promoting a positive school climate, but it is also something that this board has identified as a priority in the Be Well 365 program. And the last thematic area was regarding school psychologists needing to be a member of each school's threat assessment team. And in the model policy does require each school team to have a school-based mental health staff, which could include school counselors and or school psychologists, and that's addressed more specifically in the regulation, which is in development with the Maryland Model Policy. Also, many commenters provided insight into their experiences at schools, and rather than commenting on the policy specifically, they shared specific events that they had or experiences that they'd had. So some of those comments have been forwarded on to staff for follow-up. So they will be looked at, even though they were not specific to the policy and to be addressed in this context. Pardon me, they're not being addressed in this context. They have been forwarded for further consideration. So,
Mrs. O'Neill.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to comment about, I'm pleased that we received so many comments. To me, it looked like there were a lot of comments sort of about the devil's in the details of how we're going to actually implement the behavioral threat assessment. And, yes, there were a lot of comments about bullying. I also noted that there was one comment that said we need to arm teachers. And, obviously the board passed a resolution that we're not in favor of arming teachers. But, I do agree with the commenters. The devil is really in implementation. I think the policy is, well crafted. I think that it's actually putting forward everybody doing what they're supposed to do.
I think that a lot of the comments talk about things as is duly noted in the right-hand column. They talk about things that we're already doing, so I think that's just a testament to the fact that we need to keep doing them and keep doing them well and comprehensively at all of our schools. But we also need to make sure that students, parents, community members, staff know that we're doing them and that that we're integrating them well into the daily life of students. And some of these things are better done subtly but continuously going on in the background in the daily operation of a school, but at the same time there's very rightful angst in the community, especially with relation to recent events around here and across the country. So I think striking the balance between those two aspects is also important.
So now that we have reviewed the comments, we do have a few recommendations for changes to the policy. And we have, for ease of working our way through the recommendations, you have received a one-page listing of the proposed changes, and I will walk us through them, and with your guidance, we will accept or reject the proposed changes. Okay, I'm going to start us. First of all, everybody has this, right?
I just have to.
Okay. Our first changes are on page 6 of 17, and at line 133, we're looking to include, add the language staff and community before feedback. So it would read, MCPS shall assess existing prevention and early intervention programs, so on and so forth, using a variety of metrics, including student, staff, and community feedback. I'm going to assume that unless I hear an objection, we're okay, and I'll keep it moving. Okay, line 141, still on page 6. In the listing of types of data for which we want to keep, there's an interest in adding fights. So robust systems shall be used for monitoring school climate data as well as critical safety data such as arrests, bullying and harassment, fights, gang incidents, truancy, and chronic absenteeism. Okay, at line 149, at the bottom of page 6, we're looking to add and compliance with board policies and MCPS regulations. So before the period, it would say staff members who are trained at de-escalation and physical intervention skills and compliance with board policies and MCPS regulations.
Escalation.
So you want to take, so you're suggesting taking out
No, only adding.
physical, oh.
We're
Okay,
just
intervention
adding and
skills, I see,
and
just at the end. Okay.
Okay?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Okay. On page 7, line 161, this is an edit to the name of the department. It should read, instead of Maryland State Department of Education, Subcabinet of the Maryland Center for School Safety. That's just an edit we should have made sooner. On to line 251, which is on page 10. We're going to insert "and other public safety agencies," so it would read collaboration with county partners, including health, law enforcement, and other public safety agencies. At line 273, which is on page 11, we're adding a reference to Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Services as the county partners with whom we are collaborating, with whom we collaborate.
Wait, I'm so sorry, just as a technical
Sure.
question. Back to 250, if you're making that change, do you need to put a comma after health and take out the "and"?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. I am on page 13, again referencing our other public safety agencies, just again making sure we fairly represent all of our public safety partners. Okay, on page 14. This is trickier than it's, this seems trickier than it is. So let me just tell you what we're doing. On number 4 and 5, in response to a comment, it became clear that number 4 sort of tried to do too much in one paragraph. It talks about, in collaboration with the local law enforcement, we're going to inform the community of and provide resources. So I'm just proposing breaking up 4 and 5 in a way that in number 4, we're saying we're going to inform the community of options for accessing the anonymous reporting system, and then the number 5 becomes, so it's a new number 5, talks about the resources in collaborating with our county partner agencies to provide resources for responding to tips that we receive on the hotline, as well as further developing and implementing. So the only really new thing is, if you're looking on the one-pager, starting a new line 340, a new number 5, where it says, "and further develop and implement procedures for communicating with the community regarding matters pertaining to school safety and security." I hope that clarified. It was just too much going on in one paragraph with number 4, so we broke it into 2 parts, and then added this last part about process for communicating with the community.
Oh, can you give me one quick second?
Sure.
Sorry. So, I just the process of communicating with the community. Communicate supports them. That's just in reference to communicating the supports, not actually in reference to communicating with the community in reference to
So on
things that
number
come up.
9, on this page, on the single page,
Uh-huh.
so the last 2 lines where it says, "and further develop and implement procedures for communicating with the community regarding matters pertaining to school safety and security."
Yes, very good. Because
that
in
work?
my notes I had that we need to make sure that we have something like that, so that's perfect. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we're good with that?
Yes, very good.
Okay, thank you. On page 15, at line 367, again, it may be helpful for me to tell you what we're trying to do here. There was a reference in some of the comments about the memorandum of understanding that we have with the ICB, and we wanted to make note of that, but then we thought we have other memoranda regarding safety and community partners as well. So the language already speaks to regularly conduct and update safety evaluations of each school. So, and report to the board, basically. We're adding and review the memoranda of understanding with county agencies to identify and, if necessary, develop solutions. So whether the solutions that issues that are identified are with ICB MOU or the SRO MOU, that it's all incorporated here in this section. And then, again, in an effort to incorporate the concerns about ICB and use of our school outside of school time, we're adding language that says, including at 374, it would read, identify and evaluating patterns of safety concerns on MCPS property, including MCPS property, and as well as before and after school events. So we tried to do a lot of work in that one paragraph.
I'm sorry, can it say events and programs? Just thinking about.
Yes, please.
And then, again, in response to a public comment, at line 379, where it currently says, the superintendent shall make periodic reports to the board regarding the status of school safety and security. We want to insert including, but not limited to, school-level behavior threat assessment data. And that does it.
Okay. The other safety or public agencies, mentioned some of those because you talked about fire and police. What else?
I'm sorry.
HHS or anything?
Well, you
yes,
mentioned HHS, but how about Homeland Security? Anything else?
So we have all of the municipal law enforcement agencies, Homeland Security. Mr. Clark, anything else we would consider?
I would think certainly the local Department of Homeland Security with Montgomery County government and all those other variety of public safety agencies that provide support to us on a daily basis.
Yeah. Okay. Because we specifically mentioned 3, but not those. Thank you for that.
So that's all that we have.
Okay. Any comments at all?
I don't know that this is
Ms. Mondowski.
the place for it or anything else, but I do, I have a lot of concerns about our consistency in the way we do communicate with parents, so I'm very appreciative that we're putting that in here. I don't know how specific it needs to be or not needs to be. It should be in the regulations.
The specifics.
Okay. Specifics. Okay.
And we wanted to particularly note that we're doing this in collaboration with our law enforcement partners, as well as other partner agencies, because sometimes, we can only say so much because of the influencing or impacting the circumstance that's being handled.
Right. And I understand that, and I think, Mrs. O'Neill's makes a good point. It should be in the regulations. I just, like I said, have a real concern with the inconsistencies in our schools in terms of notifications of parents and when and on what issues and things like that, so.
Okay, we have nothing further.
Okay. Do we have anything else? Okay.
So, I guess the only other thing is that we recommend that this policy go forward to the full board for action, so
As
I
amended.
move it as amended.
All in favor?
All in favor? Thank you. So it's ready to go.
Perfect, thank you. So that's it?
Yep, that's it.
We're adjourned?
Yeah, is it okay if we adjourn? Is everybody? Okay.
Yep.
We're adjourned.